Hello again, my fiber friends. I'm ReRe, and this is Exploration Crochet, the podcast where we poke at yarn, history, culture, and occasionally television producers who think crochet and knitting are the same thing. I'm kidding. A little. But seriously, today we're stepping into the world of TV with a look at the first 4 episodes of Game of Wool Finding Britain's Best Knitter. Now, I would really be surprised if anyone listening to this podcast had not heard or seen something somewhere about this show. There is a lot available out there, starting after the airing of the first episode. And I must admit, this has been the most difficult podcast I've done so far. And it's not because I don't think the show is worth talking about. So let me first state I am not here to pile on the dog pile that has been piling up week after week, with both crocheters waving their hooks and knitters flailing their needles. As a crocheter who has knit but does not necessarily consider herself a knitter, and as someone who is not British, I'll be honest, in some ways, this show really is not for me. I feel like this. It's someone else's party that I've decided to pop in on, and if I don't like the food or the music or the atmosphere, I am free to go home. I really wish others felt the same way. Everything ain't for everybody, but it is about yarn, it is about stitches, and for better or for worse, it's already making waves in both the knitting and crocheting communities. So we're going to walk through episodes 1 through 4, talk about what the show gets right and wrong about crochet from my perspective, and touch on how makers are feeling about it so far. Quick note, there are spoilers ahead. If you'd rather see the episodes first, hit pause, binge the episodes, then come back with your project bag. I'll leave the link for the first 4 episodes in the show notes. All right, so as they say on Game of Wool, let's cast on. So, before we dive into the episodes, I want to reiterate something. I am a firm believer in the idea that everything isn't meant for everyone. These shows are produced with a particular audience member in mind, and that person is probably not me. For one, I'm a crocheter who knits, and while I may be considered bistitchual, I can follow a knitting pattern and a chart with the aid of YouTube. I know what Fair Isle and steeking is. I still would not consider myself a knitter. My primary language is crochet. Second, I'm not British. So some of the cultural scaffolding, the BBC style competition vibe, the Britain's Best X framing, I'm experiencing as an outsider looking in. I have watched none of these shows. No, not even the Great British Bake Off, which members of my family keep telling me I would enjoy. Which brings me to my third point. Most importantly, I am not a reality TV show, contest show person. I don't like the contrived drama. I don't like the audience manipulation through camera angles and editing and music. It's just not my cuppa, if you will. So, I came into the Game of Wool Finding Britain's Best Knitter with cautious excitement. The broadcast opened with, "A new generation of knitters are taking the world by storm. With just 2 needles or a hook, they are testing the limits of creativity." So, from the start, I had questions. Looking at the folks participating, I wondered, who is this new generation? There was at least one contestant in her mid-60s with judges to match. And secondly, was crochet being folded under the word knitting? That couching of crochet inside knitting is exactly the thing a lot of crocheters have been pushing back against for years. Yes, they are related crafts, but they are not the same, and nor are they interchangeable. For a casual person on the street to confuse the two is one thing, But this is a national television program proclaiming it's going to find the best of. So, before we dive into the episodes, let's talk a little bit about how we even got here. For starters, in July of 2024, BBC Channel 4 dropped a press release announcing the show, explaining the concept of the program and how they expected it to be received. I'll leave a link for all of these things that I'm going to be referencing in the show notes. Following that, they put out casting calls asking for amateurs that could both hand knit and crochet. I happened to come across a YouTube channel called Stuart the Wool Patch, which was starting a series of videos called Unraveled, Your Game of Wool Companion Show. And, as an aside, of all the things I've seen out there about the show, this is the only one that I would recommend. If you want a mellow, well-balanced approach to the show from Brits, this is the one to watch. Again, the link will be in the program notes. The host, Stuart, an LYS owner from Suffolk, was approached in November of 2024 on Instagram. A show producer approached him about auditioning. He eventually decided he would give it a go and submitted an application. Following a phone interview, he was invited to London just before Christmas for an audition, and he was encouraged to bring samples of his work. The audition was all day, according to his report, a full morning of knitting along with a screen test, and the afternoon had 2 timed challenges. The first was knitting a beanie in 90 minutes, and the person was encouraged to embellish the beanie however they liked. The second was crocheting a specialty granny square, and they were given 40 minutes. Stuart displayed a picture of his unfinished square. He said he got to row 6 and there were 7 rows. And after watching the show, I would suspect the pattern had come from the episode 3 guest judge, Janie Crow, or Jane Crowfoot, who is known for her extremely intricate crocheted squares and motifs. I'll leave a link as well. So, from the start, they always intended for crochet to be part of the skill set. They were looking for people who could handle speed, cameras, mixed techniques, and both crochet and knitting. So now, let's talk about those episodes. So each week consists of 2 challenges, a solo challenge and a team challenge. For episode 1, Heritage Week, the solo challenge was to create a Fair Isle story tank. Think vest. They were to work in stranded color work with motifs in ReRe patterns, and they needed to tell their personal story. They had 12 hours. The team challenge was to knit a sofa cover, including things for the legs. They were broken into 2 teams and they had 10 hours. Week 2 was Icons Week. The solo challenge was iconic doggy outfits, which were to feature both knit and crochet. They had to create a coat and headgear for the dogs, and it had to be based on a personal icon. They had 12 hours. The team challenge was to create a 1980s mohair jumper using intarsia. They were broken into 3 teams and they had 10 hours. This week saw the casting off of the first contestant whose strength obviously lay with crochet. For episode 3, Holiday Week, or what we would call vacation, the solo challenge was to create glamorous form-fitting swimwear, bikinis, one pieces, or trunks. If they opted to make trunks, they also had to make some sort of accessory. The swimsuit was to consist of knit or crochet or both. They had 12 hours. And this is when we get to the first challenge that was framed as only crochet. They were broken into pairs and they were to crochet a functional deck chair sling. There were 4 teams and they had 8 hours. In episode 4, which was Kids Week, the solo challenge was to crochet, using crochet only, to make toddler fancy dress, or costumes as we would call them here. And it had to include a body part, headgear, and accessories. They were given 12 hours. The team challenge was to make an interactive wall hanging, and they were to be built from individual panels that formed a creature or a scene. The panels had to have moving parts, varying textures, and was basically for sensory play for kids. There were two teams that each had 8 hours. This week also saw the casting off of another contestant who claimed crochet as her greater strength. Now, honestly, I'm indifferent when it comes to the challenges. It's television. This is basically a game show. I truly appreciate the creativity displayed by the contestants. Are these things objects that most knitters or crocheters are interested in making? No. But the fact that they can be constructed using knit and crochet is something to be celebrated. And as a crocheter, I was both impressed and proud. And I can only imagine how intriguing these things seem to people with only a cursory understanding of either craft, if they, and the community at large, would allow them to be intrigued. So now we've arrived at the portion of the podcast where I share my personal thoughts. The downside for the whole experience has been twofold for me: the production within and the knit crochet community without. First, let's talk about that production. The one thing that seems to have everyone's yarn tangled is the fact that they put out casting calls all over Great Britain for knitters and crocheters, knowing the contestants would need both skills, and still they call it Britain's Best Knitter. And I have to agree with the folks' irritation on this point. Why the conflation? They are two separate skills with logic and precision all their own. They could have simply left it as Game of Wool. Of the first 8 challenges, 5 allowed the contestants to incorporate crochet, and 3 required crochet exclusively. Which then leads us into the whole reality show era about things. The time constraints are ridiculous, but tension does make for good television. No, this is not how real designers design, but again, this is not reality. It's not a documentary or a scientific presentation of the crafts. It's a game. Casting issues, which is probably my biggest thing, the one thing that makes it unpleasant to watch. Some folks really shouldn't be on the show. The skills gap is just too gaping. And instead of admiring and basking in the creativity, I'm left feeling that some of the contestants are, as one contestant put it before she was cast off, out of their depths. The producers knew where the skill sets lay. The contestants didn't until they arrived at the audition and could see their competition. I personally do not believe that the 10 people selected were the best 10 of the hundreds who auditioned. So I'm left with the thought that some were chosen just for us to watch the flailing and struggling to stay alive. I would have preferred to see 10 incredibly gifted people be cutthroat in their attempts to outdesign and outcreate each other. To me, that would have been great television. Another thought about the production, and this is funny when I think about it, like they didn't think we would notice. The contestants are wearing the same thing, same hairstyle after 20 to 22 hours of knitting and crocheting. As a viewer, you know there is some sort of time compression mumbo jumbo happening. So they get up one day and they knit crochet for 12 hours. So let's say they're all early risers at 6 in the morning. They start the first challenge and they crochet or knit from 6 to 7 p.m. if they give them time for lunch. Then they have to knit crochet for another 8 to 10 hours. So now that's 7 p.m., 8 p.m. to 5, 6 a.m. if they give them an hour for dinner. Nobody is game showing like that. The physical toll alone isn't sustainable. It's like so weird. Just let the people change clothes, because now I know not to trust what I see. That is the simplest editing trick in the book. The producer or editor can go back in and slice and dice however they feel to create the moods they want. I know not to trust the things that I see are actually happening chronologically because I have really no idea. They're inside of a barn, so there's no time reference, especially when it's obvious the contestants have had time since they were initially given a challenge to either talk to a family member to get ideas of what they should do or to request to get particular props to help them. Holger in one episode actually had time to make a dog mannequin, and I cannot believe he took time out of his 12 hours. And now, let's talk about that second issue, my knit and crochet peeps. After the first episode, the Shetland Organization of Knitters had a valid complaint, and I'll leave a link for that as well. Fair Isle is their thing. They should have been consulted, and greater effort should have been exercised to ensure the use of correct terminology. That's basic due diligence. Or the producers could have avoided the whole thing by simply calling the challenge colorwork. So, as far as credibility for the show is concerned, this was a major self inflicted wound right out of the gate. The other point about my peeps, folks talking about what knitters and crocheters wouldn't make or the materials they wouldn't use, like either craft is a monolith. This and only this is real knitting. This and only this is real crochet. As the editor of the weekly newsletter Last Week in Crochet, which looks at the global world of crochet, I can say people are doing all kinds of things with crochet. So, why the gatekeeping? Knitters don't use chunky yarn. Yeah, they do. Folks complaining about what Tom Daly is wearing. The items have obviously been either knitted or crocheted. Can we just celebrate that? And I get it. It's where we are as a people, particularly when you're standing on the sidelines. Hate gets clicks. Tearing people, places, and things down gets your numbers up. So there you are, getting your YouTube review video together and practicing all variations of head tilts and hand positions and eye rolls and wide-eyedness, various looks of surprise and disgust and dismay until you find just the right one. And then you go in and find the most odd image from the show to pair it with. And then you think, yeah, that's it, that'll work. Please. And lastly, also in the line with folks capitalizing off the show and its contestants, the kits being sold initially by the sponsoring yarn companies are not in any way compensating the contestant designers. What is up with that? There has been no statement about what the winner actually wins. So, like their British Best X shows, nothing other than the title of Britain's Best Knitter, I guess. And judging by the atmosphere currently surrounding the show, people are not going to be impressed. Please pay these people for their IP. Please. It's the least you can do. So, what does Game of Wool get right and wrong about crochet? Let's start with what I think it gets right. I think there's quite a bit to celebrate and appreciate. Crochet is present and capable. It's not treated as a joke or necessarily lesser than knitting. We see mosaic, loop stitch, surface crochet, motif garments, 3D shaping, freeform elements or scrumbles, as coined by Prudence Mapstone, and more. The show often uses crochet in ways it truly shines. Sculptured headpieces, textured pieces, bold lettering and graphic panels in mosaic or intarsia style crochet. Garments built using modular crochet units, diamonds, triangles, granny squares. The judges talking about engineering and fit, including crochet pieces. When someone uses crochet in a clever way, they get real praise. For a mainstream audience, that sends a positive message. Crochet can be technical as well as imaginative and structurally important. The areas where I think the show falls short: number one, the title and framing, Britain's Best Knitter. But we've already discussed that one. Another area I think is the use of very chunky yarn and the time limits. It means that we don't always see crochet at the level of refinement many makers aspire to. Also, crochet seems to show up in more novelty style contexts, as opposed to everyday wearables, accessories, or subtle fabric. And finally, the editing is such that it leaves out the processes underlying good crochet and knitting. None of this makes the show bad. It just means that we still need to hold space for the fuller picture in our crochet communities and in teaching. And as for the show's popularity, following the first episode, viewership took a huge tumble. And I checked the other day, and judging by the tone online, it has only continued to fall. Most crocheters, while frustrated by the title, seem to enjoy that our craft is being showcased. They are, however, concerned about how narrowly it's being presented. Most knitters are also not fans of the title, but they appreciate the spotlight on their craft. They are feeling some kind of way about the frequent shifts toward crochet, though, the yarns used, and the time constraints. They are also not particularly fans of Mr. Daly as host, and the judges as judges. But the ones that are still watching are primarily focused on cheering on their favorite contestants. And it seems the yarn community at large, myself included, has serious notes about the judging. It seems way too squishy and capricious. But hey, maybe that's why those particular folks were selected. So, after 4 episodes, where am I? As a crocheter, I'm glad this show exists. I'm glad millions of people are seeing yarn used in creative ways, seeing men knit and crochet on TV, and hearing discussion about an array of crochet stitches and their uses. I recognize that this is one particular format with its own priorities. It's ridiculous to expect it to carry the whole weight of what knitting and crocheting are and what we want them to be. What I do like is the forced imagination and innovation. If you strip away the reality show BS, every challenge is basically a great creative prompt. When I watch, I find myself thinking, if it were me, what would I do? And that, I think, is where this kind of show can really serve us. Not as a definitive voice on yarn, but as a spark. So, whether you're loving Game of Wool, watching with mixed feelings, or just skipping it entirely and enjoying the community pile on, I hope this episode gives you a few new ways to think about what you're seeing. And I'd honestly love to hear your thoughts. Are you watching? Are there any designs from the first 4 episodes you'd like to reinterpret in crochet? Let me know what you think. This has been Exploration Crochet, and thanks again for letting me think out loud about Game of Wool with you today. And may your craft always feel like your party, even when you're just dropping by someone else's. Thanks for listening.